So the First Descendant has just released, and one of the main elements of this game is its hero-based nature. So instead of creating your own character and choosing, say, a class, you're instead going to choose between a handful of characters with their own suite of abilities and their own possible builds. Now, why this is important at the start of the First Descendant is because the first thing you're going to do is choose one of these starter characters. And your starting options are Viessa, Lepic, and Ajax. So in this video, I want to go through all of the abilities of these different characters and what I think is going to be the best starter choice. You can also find my creator code in the description if you plan on purchasing anything in the First Descendant. I'm not recommending you to buy anything or not to buy anything, but if you already plan on doing that, use my creator code. It'll help out the channel. Now to start off, we have Viessa, who is a cold-based caster style of character. And your first ability is going to be Frost Shards. So you fire a Frost Shard at a target, it deals damage to the enemy hit, and causes a small AoE at the target that will also inflict Ice Shackle on all enemies hit. And Ice Shackle is just a stacking slow that will also play into this character's passive. And our second ability is going to be Frost Road. So when you activate this ability, you get the Frost Road buff for 16 seconds. And while you're in this state, you'll create ice sheets on the ground as you move around. And when enemies touch these ice sheets, they are inflicted with Ice Shackle. This will also give you a pretty significant movement speed increase. So you're basically just running around, you leave a trail of frost behind you that will inflict Ice Shackle on all enemies that touch it. And then your next ability is Cold Snap. That is a small frontal ability in front of you where you just launch some chill in front of you that inflicts damage and also applies Ice Shackle to all enemies hit. So just a small frontal cone of damage. And then her final ability, which is basically her ultimate, is Blizzard. You create a blizzard at a target location and enemies within that blizzard take continuous damage. When it ends, it explodes and deals a bunch of additional damage, and it inflicts Ice Shackle on those enemies. It also seems to continuously inflict that Ice Shackle as well. Now, as mentioned, Ice Shackle is a stacking slow that starts at 20% and goes all the way up to 90%. So every additional level of Shackle will just increase the duration and increase the slow on that target. But this also plays into Viessa's passive, which is Ice Spear. And what this does is when you apply Ice Shackle to an enemy, you create an Ice Spear that will then fly to targets, hit them, dealing burst damage. So that means it's a small AoE as well. And you will apply Ice Shackle to that target. Now this passive does have a cooldown, so you won't just be able to continuously reproc it off of itself. And next up, we have Lepic, who's a Grenadier, and their first ability is Grenade Throw. You throw a grenade forward, doing a burst of damage. So as you would expect from a grenade, it blows up, does some AoE damage. And then next up, you have Overclock. So you gain this Overclock buff for 17 seconds, and this will cause your Grenade Throw and your Overkill, which is another ability we'll go over, to cause a burn on targets. And burn is just a damage over time. And his next ability is Traction Grenade. You throw a Traction Grenade and it inflicts Toad on enemies. And what that does is it pulls all enemies to the center. So what you could do is throw this grenade, it clumps up all the enemies, then you can hit them with your normal grenade, doing some pretty massive AoE damage. And then his ultimate is where he actually gets interesting. So this is Overkill. And as we went over, this will also apply burn if your Overclock is active. And this ability will equip you with a unique weapon. And while this weapon is equipped, your MP is continuously consumed. That's basically just your mana. And when your MP runs out, the weapon is unequipped. And enemies hit by the bullets of this unique weapon take burst damage, so does some AoE. And the impact zone of this creates a damaging zone, dealing continuous damage. So you basically get this new unique weapon, and you're basically just shooting explosives at enemies. Every time you shoot it, it does some AoE damage and creates this damaging field that does continuous damage. Now this ability will cost you mana to activate and will continuously drain your mana over time. And this is going to be pretty important when we go over what I think is going to be the best starting character. Now his passive is pretty simple, and I think it's going to be really strong in the end game. And he has Close Call. Upon receiving fatal damage, you gain Close Call, which lasts for 5 seconds. While Close Call is active, you have full immunity to damage, so you just can't take damage. And when it ends, you recover some HP. At level 1, it's 50%, but presumably as you level up these skills more, it'll heal you more at the end of it. And it has a 600-second cooldown. So it is a pretty long cooldown, but this is a cheat death, which is going to be incredibly strong in very high-end content. And then finally, you have Ajax, who's basically a tank. Now with Ajax, I think we have to go over his passive first because it plays into all of his other abilities. So basically how his passive works is when you use any of your abilities, you build up void energy. And when you max out your void energy, the next ability you use will be enhanced, and depending on what ability you're using, it'll have different enhancements on it. Now his first ability is going to be Orbit Barrier. You create a barrier in front of you that blocks damage, and when the barrier is hit, it inflicts reflection damage on the enemy. So it basically reflects damage back to the enemies that shoot it. You and your allies can also shoot through this barrier. Now, when you use this ability with your passive, so it's enhanced, it now will increase the reflection damage, and that max reflection damage is based on your defense followed by skill power. So it basically just massively increases that reflection damage, and that scales more depending on some of the stats you can go into. Now his next ability is a Void Walk. You jump forward and land, dealing damage and stunning enemies. And when this ability is enhanced, it just increases the stun duration. It actually massively increases the stun duration. So this is actually very good for AoE CC. And then his next ability is Expulsion. You deal damage to nearby enemies and inflict knockback. And if you use this as an enhanced ability, it increases the damage and the range. So all you're doing with this is basically just pulsing out a small AoE attack around you, deals damage, knocks back enemies. And then his final ability is Hypercube. You create a dome-shaped barrier that blocks damage. And when using this as an enhanced skill, it gives enhancement to your allies. And specifically, it increases their explosive attack and their firearm attack. So this is basically just a big bubble you pop. It increases your defensives, obviously will protect you and your allies while they're inside. And if it's enhanced, it buffs up you and your allies as well. And if I would have to choose a ranking between these three characters, mine would be Viessa at number 1, Ajax at number 2, and Lepic at number 3. And there's a handful of reasons for this. Viessa is just incredibly strong. She CCs enemies. Her Blizzard is a decent sized AoE. All of her skills deal decent damage. And she has that movement speed increase on her Frost Road ability. So you're getting movement speed with her. You're getting good AoE damage. You're getting AoE CC. So she is a very easy character to play when you don't have a setup build. And we have Ajax at number 2 just because I think he's generally going to be a bit weaker until you get a bit more build with him, and he's going to be a bit slower of a character, but he's going to have really good defenses, and if you use his ability enhancement correctly, you can still do some massive AoE, and you can have quite a lot of hard CC. So if you want to play a bit of a tankier character, then definitely pick Ajax over Viessa. Now that just leaves Lepic, and the reason I have him at number 3 is because it seems like a lot of his power is built into his overkill, but that continuously drains your mana. So while you're lower level, when you don't have a setup build, it seems like he's a bit weaker at those lower levels. Now once you start getting up into higher levels, once you can start creating a build for him, and you can say build into overkill, he will become incredibly strong because there are builds that essentially allow you to have infinite overkill, which is basically his ultimate. So you can pretty much just stay in his ultimate at all times once you get up to the point to having a full build focused around this. But I do think he's going to be a bit weaker at the lower levels. But that's all I want to go over. So thanks for watching.